record, but don't, you probably seen how this works. Don't let that stop you from asking a question. So these are not public links. I don't make my channel totally public anymore because I was getting too many weird random comments from people that were not about what the video was about. So I think when we stopped last time, we had been talking about how gases move between the blood and some other place. And when we're looking at blood supply to the lungs, there are CO2 moving from blood to air, generally, and oxygen moving from the air in the lungs back into the blood. And that's our external respiration. And we have a similar process, just in reverse. Once the blood supply and the capillaries come to our body tissues, where we've got oxygen and CO2 moving back and forth. But in that case, the CO2 is going to move from the body cells and into the blood. And the oxygen will move from the blood into the cells. And if you think about what blood is for, it's to deliver oxygen to the cells. That's a thing that you know. And if you remember that the blood is delivering oxygen, and the blood is going to take away CO2 from the cells, that makes sense. And that's the function that we call internal respiration. Moving those gases between blood and somewhere else. So for internal respiration, those gases will keep on moving as long as the cells are using up oxygen, and as long as they keep on making more CO2, those blood gases will go in that direction. Just to reiterate that, the cells are always using up oxygen, so they need more, and the blood's going to deliver that to them. And the cells are always producing CO2 as a waste, and the blood will keep carrying that away from them. So why do the cells need oxygen in the first place? What do they do with it?
They transport it.
It diffuses into them, and they do something with it there, and the blood transports it to the cells. What do cells do with oxygen? Why do they keep using it up? What happens to it?
So what?
It what?
Why, so what happens to what?
To the oxygen. Yeah, so what I'm saying is cells will always need more and more oxygen because they're using it up. For what? I would have struggled with this when I was at this stage of college. Like, yeah, cells can't live without oxygen. You know that. They're using it.
Energy production?
Yeah, energy production. So oxygen is picking up those electrons at the end of the electron transport chain. And so you get oxygen and electrons and some hydrogens, they turn into water eventually, and that's why the cells keep using it up. And it keeps disappearing once it's delivered to the cells because they're needed for energy production. and it turns into water, and then they have to have this constant supply. And then at the same time, they are making CO2 during fuel burn. And we got, glycolysis, where you start to break down sugar for energy. And then mostly during the citric acid cycle, when cells are taking apart macros to make fuel, they're producing CO2 as a waste. And so the using up of oxygen and the producing of CO2, they're kind of part of the same overall process, and they're happening all the time. And as long as you are living and doing generally okay, your cells have to have more oxygen, and your cells are producing CO2, and they're doing that all the time. So the blood is supposed to be bringing more oxygen and taking away CO2. And normally that part works pretty well. We don't normally have problems with carrying the blood gases or getting them to move in between the blood and the cells, but where we tend to have problems is in the lungs, usually. So either we are not ventilating and we're not getting air in and out of the lungs, that might be a problem, or if we have thickness, anything that is causing a thickness in between the air in the lungs and the blood passing by, like the scarring or the mucus or the inflammation or whatever, those are where the problems usually are with people's blood gases. And it's on the beginning end. So carrying those gases around in the blood, that's the last of the functions, those 4 functions, and that's gas transport. And oxygen and CO2 have a little bit different ways that they travel around in the blood. So on your exam review sheet for exam 4, you have a question about how do these gases travel in the blood? And the ways that oxygen travels in the blood and the way that CO2 travel in the blood, you do need to memorize those. And for oxygen, it's not very hard at all. Most of it is traveling around with hemoglobin protein in the red blood cells. And you kind of know that already, that red blood cells carry oxygen and they need hemoglobin to do that. So most of the oxygen that's in your blood is actually with the red blood cells and riding around with hemoglobin. And then you just have a little bit that's dissolved in your plasma, mostly on hemoglobin, just a very little. 2% of your blood oxygen is actually just dissolved in the plasma. So notice this arrow to show oxygen is coming off of the red blood cell, not really out of the, I mean, there's a little bit in the plasma, just barely, but most of it's coming off the red blood cell. But for carbon dioxide, there's 3 ways that carbon dioxide travels in the blood. And you'll want to memorize those also. Two of them match with what's happening with oxygen. So about 1/4 of your carbon dioxide in your blood is actually together with hemoglobin. And that was a thing, I didn't know that until I taught this class. I thought hemoglobin is just for oxygen, but it'll carry CO2 also. And when hemoglobin is bound together with carbon dioxide, it's called carbaminohemoglobin, which is a mouthful. But it tells you what it is. It's carbon dioxide together with hemoglobin. And then you've got some CO2 that's dissolved in the plasma, floating around, kind of like carbonation, but not enough to fizz out of your blood. A little bit in the plasma, but then the rest of it is in the form of a different chemical. Called bicarbonate ion. So we can put those numbers down here also with this picture. So we've got 7% of this CO2 is dissolved in the plasma. 23% is carried around by hemoglobin with the red blood cells, but most of it is dissolved in a different form. And they're saying here carbonic acid bicarbonate. We're going to look at that. And this equation tells why that happens. So we're going to write this on the next page, this particular chemistry equation. And if you only memorize one chemistry equation in all of A&P, both 1 and 2, this one is going to be the most helpful for you in future courses. And it's called the bicarbonate equation. And this bicarbonate reaction, or this bicarbonate equation, explains why if you've got too much CO2 in your blood becomes acidic. So it's a fact, if you're not getting rid of CO2 out of your blood becomes acidic. And this equation describes why. So this one also is something that you need to memorize and write down on exam 4. And we're going to write it exactly the way that I want you to write it there. So we start out with carbon dioxide, and when you're writing this stuff, I also want you to write the English words underneath it. And this one you probably know, CO2, that's carbon dioxide. And when you have carbon dioxide in your blood, it is in a water solution. It's with water together in the plasma. And we know that's H2O. So they exist there together in the plasma, CO2, H2O, carbon dioxide, and water. And together, those are going to form a combination chemical in which you add together all of these letters and numbers. So it becomes a chemical called H2CO3. And if you're not a huge fan of chemical equations, like there are no numbers together with this, you just add together, both of them join. You still got 2 H's, 2 hydrogens, you've got 1 carbon, and you got 3 oxygens, but now they're all together in one thing. And this is called carbonic acid. They combine to make an acid in the plasma. And that carbonic acid is kind of a weak acid. And it will lower your blood pH. make it more acidic. And then that carbonic acid tends to pretty quickly fall apart into some other combination of chemicals. Which are these two things. So one of them is just H plus, so a hydrogen ion. This is the same thing as acid. This is the same thing as a proton, H plus. So that's not too bad, H plus acid. But this one is called bicarbonate. You all are not in exercise physiology yet. It's a fall class, so if you're exercise science, you're probably gonna have that in the fall, next fall. And bicarb, people tend to call it bicarb. It has a lot of relevance to exercise and blood chemistry and performance and so on, but it's this. So a negatively charged thing, a positively charged thing. This is what you end up with. And bicarbonate is a weak base. So we've got 5 chemicals and 5 names of things. And the other important aspect of this is that you draw the arrows in both directions. So this equation, it can move in this direction, or it can move in this direction. And which direction it moves in kind of depends on what's happening in different parts of your body. But this is the bicarbonate equation. And the way this works, if you get more of something on one side, it will push toward the other side. So if you get more CO2 in your blood, the equation will kind of shift to balance that out, and then you get more acid produced, and then your blood becomes really acidic more than it should. So breathing affects this, and your kidneys affect this, and a little bit your diet can somewhat affect this, but it has a lot of side ripples all over the body. Let's have a blue marker and put less. So if you have more CO2 in your blood than you should, it will be more acidic. But faint. That word says remove. If you remove CO2 from the body, you also end up removing acid as well. So in the end, and this is not the only day we look at this concept, but in the end, how you breathe is going to affect your blood pH. Breathing affects your blood chemistry and changes the pH of your blood. And so we're going to come back to that basically 2 more times in the rest of this unit. Once when we talk about kidneys and once when we talk about blood chemistry. So that's coming up next. Okay, so this morning I've been following this story for the past few weeks that there were a little kindergarten class or some very small kids that went to Appalachian Fair and they petted the animals. And then within some number of days, a lot of them got really sick with bad E. coli infection from the animals. And some of those kids then spread that to other kids in their house. And this is what E. coli looks like, in a microbiology lab growing on a plate. And one of the kids that went on the trip had little, I think they're twin brothers, and one of them is sicker than the other. His name is River, and River is still in ICU because he got this E. coli infection from the big brother, and River is having kidney failure, which is why I put this up here. And this is all really bad. And he's having kidney dialysis, and he is also had some brain damage from his kidneys not working from the E. coli infection. So this is just heartbreaking, and there's other kids that are on dialysis that are just tiny, and it's just a tragedy. So as we go through this unit, I'm going to talk about that and how that happened, and how it could possibly be treated, let's say. So Rivers and some of those other kids that had this bad infection, their kidneys aren't working well, and they will need kidney dialysis. And we might watch that video at the end of today. I don't want to get too bogged down in that, but if your kidneys are not working, oops, this marker is just too faint. If your kidneys aren't working properly, to filter your blood, what they're supposed to be doing is filter your blood so that wastes don't build up and poison you. Kidneys are your main blood filter. You may think, oh, I thought that the liver was a blood filter. Your liver is a blood filter, but your liver is supposed to be filtering out things like drugs and alcohol, and that are not every day. Your kidney is your everyday blood filter. And what it's mostly filtering is wastes that come from your normal metabolism. Waste that you make all the time because you are burning macros for fuel. That's what your kidneys is supposed to be filtering. And if they don't, those are going to build up and they're going to accumulate to really high levels that will damage the rest of your body, like your brain. So your kidneys have a few functions, but filtering is the main function. So this first one here is saying your kidneys regulate the volume and the composition and the pH of the plasma. And your kidneys remove metabolic waste. Both of those have to do with balancing blood chemistry. And then they do kind of some other miscellaneous tasks. Like they control how many red blood cells you make, and they help control your blood pressure. And they help control how much sodium and calcium stay in your blood. But they're balancing your blood chemistry by filtering different stuff. And how they do that is really cool. But it has complicated anatomy and pretty complicated physiology of how they do that. So we're first going to do the rest of the day, talk about kidney anatomy. You're supposed to have two. They are on the back of your torso wall, up under your bottom ribs in the back. So if you are a MMA fan or boxing and you've seen people get each other in a clinch and they're trying to hit each other up under like this, kind of aiming at the person's kidneys, which is mean but effective to disable. Maybe disable is not the right word, but they're tucked up under the ribs in the back. We're looking here from the back. This is the person's left, this is their right. And there is also a spleen up on the left torso wall, but it's up here and it's closer to the stomach, and there's only one of that. So you'll want to look in lab on Tuesday. 2 kidneys, 1 spleen up on the left torso wall. Oh, and then they are connected down to the bladder by these tubes called ureters, which we'll look at those in a minute. So your kidneys are doing this filtering, and the stuff that they filter out of the blood becomes urine. And this is what's supposed to be in the urine. These things in the blue. And until I taught this class, I literally never thought about where urine came from or what was really in it at all. But your kidneys make it, and they are making it out of stuff that's filtered from the blood. And you can think of it as it's your kidney's job to remove these things from the body on a regular basis. So urine being liquid helps us get it out of the body. And we actually don't get rid of that much water through urination unless we're super well hydrated. And then the things that are supposed to be in it is a chemical called urea, and that's where we get the name urine. And we make urea when we break down protein for fuel. So that's just normal. We ought to be having protein in the diet, but your level of urea tracks with your level of protein intake. We also make a little bit of a chemical called uric acid, which comes when we break down DNA and RNA. There's not as much of that because there's not as much DNA and RNA in our diet or in our bodies overall. And then there's another chemical that's supposed to be in urine. It's called creatinine. Creatinine forms during muscle breakdown. And that's a normal part of waste in urine. But if a person is lifting really hard or doing really intense muscle building, let's say, they will have more creatinine in the urine than somebody who's not. But even somebody who never lifts, our muscles wear out. And when we rebuild and repair muscles, we make creatinine, and it's gonna be in the urine. The creatinine amount that's in the urine, we end up using that to measure kidney function. And there's a measurement called GFR that we'll talk about later, but it's using how much creatinine is in the urine versus how much creatinine is in the blood. And then the other thing that's in urine is you will eliminate some amino acids and some electrolytes by urinating as well. So this is what's normal, what you should have in your urine. And then there's a lot of stuff that could be abnormal and that you hope is not in your urine, but that's the normal, healthy urine. So when our kidneys make urine, the urine drains into these tubes called ureters. And the ureters connect the kidney with the bladder. And they're actually pretty long because your kidneys are up pretty high, up under your rib cage. So the taller the person, the longer their two ureters should be. So bladder is down inside the pelvis, kidneys up under the ribs, ureters in between. And we tend to not ever think about ureters unless we have a kidney stone, and then we know exactly where they are, because if you've had one, the pain that you feel as that stone moves down is following along the path of the ureter that it is in. If people have a kidney stone, its real name is renal calculus, and renal has to do with something related to the kidney. Calculus means rock or stone, so renal calculus, kidney stone. And that's when your urine is too concentrated and it starts to crystallize and you get little crystals forming up in the kidney. And they will, let's make a little crystal there, just like sharp. Forms up in the kidney, and then it starts to travel down the ureter. And then when the ureter gets narrow, it will get stuck. And then your ureter will try to push it on through, but it's sharp and it's stuck and it will hurt. And that's why kidney stones give so much pain. That says stuck, that little word. But hopefully you don't have a kidney stone and you don't have anything stuck in your ureters. And the ureters will just allow urine to move on down into the bladder or the urinary bladder. Should have a yellow marker for this. We think about our bladders a lot more than our ureters because we feel things from our bladders more often. Probably the last time you talked about bladder was in A&P 1 when you were talking about different tissue types and that microscope test of the different epithelium. And there was one called transitional epithelium that can stretch, and that's within the bladder. So your bladder is set up so that it will fill most of the time. And most of the time be in the process of filling up, and then you can empty it, and then it will start to fill up again. So I would have kind of imagined that the ureters like come in from the top and they kind of like shower urine down into the bladder. It's actually not like that. They come in and connect at the bottom, and then the level of urine as your bladder fills up, it will kind of rise like so. And when it gets pretty full, this muscle in its wall called the detrusor is going to contract when your bladder is getting full, and that's when you feel like you have to go. So it will sense, oh, getting full, start to contract, and you would recognize that as, oh, okay, I need to go, I need to empty my bladder, technically. And then whether you do that or not depends on these two areas called sphincters. So you've got an internal one that you cannot control whether that opens or not. And then you've got an external one that you can control. Your internal urethral sphincter is going to open when your bladder is full, whether you want it to or not. The external one has muscles around it. They're shown here, and there's like a band of smooth muscle that goes around the urethra right here and can squeeze it. So when you are trying to hold it, you are contracting this external urethral sphincter. And that is controllable after learning. So potty training little kids is actually teaching them to contract this when they feel that this one is about to open up. Contract this, hold it, make it to a potty, pee in the potty, stay dry. It's a lot harder than it sounds. Good luck. When I was trying to potty train our oldest one, I was talking to my mom on the phone and I was really frustrated. And I said, how did you even do this? And she said, you know, I don't even remember. And it made me so mad because that was my whole major life problem at the time. She couldn't even remember. But you move on and you forget once everybody has got the control of their bladder. Okay, so your bladder is always down in your pelvic cavity, but if you're a man or a woman, you have different things in your bladder's vicinity as part of your anatomy. So in women, female anatomy here and the male anatomy here. For women, the uterus is on top of the bladder. And normally that's not a big deal unless there's fetus in there weighing it down. And so if pregnant women say, she is just bouncing around on top of my bladder, that is true. Maybe not the bouncing part, but they are right on top of it, squishing it. And for men, there is a gland. It's not easy to see on here, but it's called prostate gland. That is right under the bladder. And that causes a different set of problems if the prostate gland enlarges. So if either of these are getting bigger or enlarging, that's gonna cause issues for men and women, but the issues are a opposite effect. So if the uterus is getting heavy with the fetus and the fetus is squishing on the bladder, it will make it harder for women to hold it. For men, if the prostate is enlarging and it's squeezing on the urethra that drains the bladder, it makes it harder for men to totally empty their bladder when they get older. So for men that are older and they have enlarged prostate, it's gonna be harder for them to fully drain their bladder, and then they have to go more often, which is annoying for them. For females, they are going to have a hard time if they're pregnant. To get their bladder totally full because it's squished by the fetus. And both men and women in those situations, they will have to go urinate more frequently. So like frequent bathroom visits, don't get too far from a bathroom. Annoying in both cases. But once someone does have to go, urine is going to drain from the bladder and into the urethra. And another big difference between men and women urinary anatomy is how long is their urethra. Whoops, gotta. So here's the female urethral length, and here is the male urethral length, and average numbers are 4 centimeters for a female, which is about like that, versus 20 for males, which is about like that. Huge difference. And that shortness of length is why women tend to get more urinary tract infections because that is a shorter distance for bacteria to swim through. So if bacteria are going to infect the bladder and cause a UTI or urinary tract infection, they have to move from outside through the urethra and move up into the bladder. And for men, it's about 5 times longer journey. It's just harder for bacteria to make a long journey than a short journey. I don't know if I asked this question anymore, but for a long time, I would put some type of question on this exam that has to do with either why do men and women get different rates of UTIs, or why do men and women's prostate and uterus affect their bladder control or something like that. So about 8 years ago, I had the question, why do women get UTIs more than men? And it's like a 2-point question or something, not a big question. And someone just wrote 2 words, tight pants. And I thought I was gonna just lose it right there. We did not talk about tight pants, and that is not the major cause, and men can wear tight. So I just wrote -2. Went over that question really carefully when we went over exams later, but it's urethra length. Something else to watch out for is differences in these words. So ureters, urethra, and uterus. They all have a lot of letters in common. A lot of letters in common, and they kind of the same length and kind of sound similar, but they're so different in what they're talking about. So please be careful with that. Most people are gonna have 2 ureters, 1 urethra, and then a uterus is only in women. And I've also had some hilarious exam answers mixing up these words. So another one, why do women have more UTIs than men? And I got the answer, men have a much longer uterus than women. Actually, no. Actually not. True. And it made me laugh, but separate words, be careful when you're writing about them or reading them, you know, on the test, which one is that? Urethra drains the urine outside the body, and ureters are connecting to the kidney, and then uterus is a female only structure. Okay. When we do release urine, that is called micturition. Micturition. And it's almost the same as what we call urination, but micturition is the conscious, controlled release of urine. If you go into occupational therapy and you have to teach adults to try to regain control of their bladder, everybody can urinate, but not everybody can do micturition, because that's the like bladder control way of urinating. So when you potty train kids, you're trying to teach them micturition. Of the control. Okay, a couple other things related to urinating and why we might not be able to. If people have a kidney stone or multiple ones, sometimes they have multiple ones, more than just one. Whichever ureter that they're stuck in will cause the ureter to act like this, to do these 3 things. So first, whatever ureter that the kidney stone is in, it's going to use muscles. They have muscles in their lining to do peristalsis. And this is the same as like pushing food through your digestive tract. Push out the stone by muscle contraction. And every time the muscles contract around the stone, it's gonna hurt really badly. That's where the pain comes from, is the contracting around the sharpness of that stone. The kidney will also sense that ureter is blocked, and that kidney will actually make less urine because it senses that that path for urine is blocked, and the other kidney will try to take over and produce more urine. So there'll be a imbalance of how much urine is coming out each one. And I had a student probably about 5 years ago that was in my fall class, and she had a kidney stone the whole semester. And it would move like an inch a week. Is that even right? Probably about what it was. And like it would stop and she'd be okay. She could come to class for a while and then it'd start again. I felt so bad for her. And I also remember there was this was in the spring. Professor Rudd had a kidney stone and he was supposed to take a Gen Bio 2 class on a field trip and drive the van. And he said, I'm in bad shape. Can you drive the van on this field trip? And I said, yeah, totally. He still went on the field trip and he still walked around and explained all the stuff to the students. He just needed me to drive the van. You were tough. That's very much what he is like. So next time we're going to stay in this same slide set and just continue on talking about the physiology part. So, don't forget to go to lab tomorrow with your lung and respiratory diagrams. You too.